turn the transmitter on a channel, and then you turn on your receivers and make sure that the receiver is in the same channel. And I strongly recommend that before you give them to anybody, you put on the headset of a receiver and check it yourself to see if it's working properly. Because if it is working properly for you, there's no reason for it to not work properly for the other person. But as you saw when we were working here, sometimes people start playing with the volume or the channel. I don't know why, but people do all the time. And then all of a sudden say, I can't hear. Well, now you know how to fix it, people. They have to be in the same channel. And they have to be turned on. And they have to be plugged in. That's it. That's the trick of this equipment. Now, what are the advantages of this equipment? If you have this equipment, and by the way, this one has the little gadget here that you attach to the microphone somehow. I've never used this one particularly. And you can wear it like this, so obviously you are now hands-free. You can take notes, and you can transmit what you're saying. Now, how is this helpful to us interpreters? Well, first of all, you're away from the old way that when I first started in this business, this is how we would interpret. No, don't go away, honey. The whole time, the whole trial. One of the things that the people perceive, the jurors even make comments about that, is that the interpreters worked for the defendant or worked for the defense. We don't. So first of all, by having equipment, you no longer will end up by the end of the day with a crooked neck because you were like this for hours. Second advantage is that now you can position yourself as an interpreter wherever you hear the best. So you're no longer tied to where the defendant is. You might be in a position where you can hear the best and maybe even see the best. So no longer are you tied to it. Third, and great advantage, is the fact that now you can work in teams. We're going to talk about team interpreting later on, but this is exactly the advantage. Now I no longer sit next to the defendant or the witness, trying to, or the victim, trying to whisper all the time. I can still whisper. And by the way, let me show you this. Many of us, I'm not naming any names or anything, but some of us are very loud, like myself. And that was one of the problems that I always had in court, so we have to practice. The good thing about this is this.
I like you this way. Keep doing it. This way.
Sorry about Mr. Video, I was just whispering, but exactly. This is good if you're going to be a Golf Channel announcer in practice. Now Tiger is getting ready for the night. So person is here, which every now and then, for instance, because I don't sit next to them. Now, every now and then, because I don't sit next to them, what I would do is every now and then, I whisper something like this. I look at them and say, can you still hear me okay, sir? And they, you see, Osman. And that's it. I don't interrupt the proceedings, and I might even say, sir, if you still hear me, please raise your hand. And they go, when they don't hear me. So all of these advantages are because now you have equipment.
That's not
And Hannah,
I do say that cannot be. If they don't hear you, therefore they cannot raise the hand.
finally somebody caught that one. It's the same question as if
You're here, raise your hand.
if you're not here, please raise your right hand. Right. So the question should be asked before you have any suspicion. So the first one is, can you hear me okay? If you stop hearing me, please. All right. So, Hannah also mentioned, what if I have 2 or 3 defendants that need interpreting? Well, it's hard enough to find one interpreter that can interpret for the defendant. Can you imagine 3 interpreters? So when we talk about team interpreting, then we're going to talk about the fact that even 2 interpreters could be enough to cover a trial with 3 or 4 defendants that speak a language where an interpreter is needed. And that is one of the things that we discovered, and this is when I was working in Orlando. We had a defendant and the judge. We only had 2 interpreters, and we had a witness who spoke whatever language we were interpreting. The interpreters, as a team, wanted to work as a team. That might be a problem because I'm going to take this off for a while. It's okay. I'm sure you can hear me in the back, right? I've never had any complaints about my voice not carrying. So when the person was on the witness stand and was not the defendant who also needed an interpreter, guess what? The equipment still works. Because I'm here interpreting for the person on the witness stand, but the person sitting over there at the defense table still can hear me. So then I can work with my team interpreter here instead of there, because when we didn't have equipment, then we had to do it both at the same time, right? So
that, Augustine, that necessitates that the defendant can hear what the witness is saying
yes,
in the LEP
Yes.
language.
yes,
Right.
yes. Which is another advantage in case, really to make them present, I guess they should have the ability to hear what the person is answering. And sometimes because you're close, they'll answer to you, the interpreter, but now with the microphone, they'll be able to hear even the non-English when the witness is testifying. So, if you have,
So here you are talking 2 interpreters for 1 defendant.
correct?
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm talking about team interpreting a little bit already. I don't know where is it in the agenda. Is it the next topic on the agenda? First of all, let me ask you a question. Is everybody clear about the use of interpreters equipment? Any questions? Huh?
Just to clarify, I think it would be very helpful to remind again. So once an interpreter comes to a courthouse, it's the interpreter's responsibility to go to get the equipment, which will be available in Portland, Biddeford, and Lewiston. So the equipment will not be in a courtroom waiting for you. So you need to go to the clerk's window to say, I am interpreter so-and-so, I need the equipment. So you are in charge. You should be the expert on knowing how to
Is the
use it.
equipment available now?
What's that?
Is the equipment available now?
Does it work? Well, in any event, we have to work with the clerks to make sure that they know how the process is gonna work. In the judicial branch, it's state government, so we have to worry about the process of where do we put the batteries? Who's gonna be in charge of the batteries? Who's gonna be in charge of the equipment? Who checks it in and out? So within this next month, we'll be in Biddeford and Lewiston and Portland, going through that process with the clerks. And so by November 1st, we should have this ready for you. Yeah.
Who is to collect the one for the defendant? The interpreter has to take it for him?
That's correct. That's correct. So you will have the equipment, the receiver and the transmitter. You will go to the marshal and you will find your LEP individual, the litigant that you are interpreting for, and then you will give them the equipment and make sure that it works. And then you can go to anywhere that is most convenient, where you can hear best, where you can hear the judge best, where you can hear the attorneys best, whoever you're interpreting. That's where you can stand now.
Do we have to sign
Batteries
in like
fit
a
in the
piece of
box, is what
paper?
I'm saying.
You're supposed to go to the clerk's office every time anyway.
Right.
So the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Every time you come in for an assignment, go see the clerk. And so you're supposed to sign in anyway, so it should be very simple. Can I have the equipment, please? Yes, and they will, we'll figure out that process. They'll give you the equipment, and then you're supposed to check out when you finish. And that's the time when you can give them your bill, and then you make sure if there's any issues or questions, you can talk about it, and you just return the equipment at that point in time. So there shouldn't be anything different except we're adding equipment to the equation.
Right, and in the federal courts, and I'm sure something very similar is gonna be established here, you come into the clerk's office, they give you the equipment, and they have a log. You know, equipment number 1, 2, 3, you sign out, and then when you return, you sign it back in, they check that you're returning everything, and then they'll accept it from you. And so it's a simple process. Now, I went to every table, except this one, because this one, I have yours, and put down a transmitter and a headset. So if somebody can take the initiative, maybe one of you will get the transmitter out of the box and the microphone out of the box. And we're gonna see another neat issue. First of all, we want to make sure that those transmitters have batteries.
Just take
That's
this
a
one out.
transmitter?
I just want to mention too, it's a new process for us, so if any of you forget to turn the equipment back in to the clerk at the end of the day, I'm not going to press any charges. Just return it when you think about it, or let me know and we'll take care of it, okay? I know that's a new process and there are a lot of things that are going on anyway when you get assignments. So it's all just, you know, we've got some months here where we're just going to figure it out together. And if there are any glitches or anything that you see that you think would work better, you just let me know.
So now every table has a transmitter and somebody's playing with it, right?
Yes.
Now, the person who has the transmitter, please connect the microphone to it, turn it on, and change the channel from 2. Yeah, from 2, change it to a different channel. Let's say 3, 4, 5, let's see how many channels we can find. Now, the people on that table that you're in, please tell them which channel you have, and they should be able to hear you in that channel. Oh. 2C, let's change it to something else, because 2, how about 4?
I want to check with your guys.
What's the channel? 3C?
3A.
What? How about 1P? 1P.
Put on the headphones and talk to us so we can.
Yeah, right there.
I think I have a transmitter.
Oh, you do? So now we have 2 transmitters. We should only have 1. Okay, what channel are you in now? What channel do you have now? 3. What channel do you have?
Listen,
3C va ragazzi.
Those are brand new batteries. They're from,
I'm on push the phone to me.
Oh, I can hear you.
We need to double check this one.
Yeah, this is.
this goes to business.
Where's Where's the other transmitter?
Yeah, I see two now.
In theory and in practice,
Yeah, they do.
attention shoppers. In theory and in practice, if you have 2 interpreters in the same courtroom, you could agree, okay, you go to 3, I'll go to 1, and you could be in the same courtroom. One would be interpreting simultaneously in Somali and the other one in Spanish at the same time. And the people who have the appropriate headset and the appropriate channel would be hearing a different interpretation. So this is another advantage of the equipment. You could have multiple languages working at the same time. Now, obviously, some of you are having problems because my equipment is old and doesn't have all of the channels available to it. But the ones that the state of Maine bought, I just didn't want to unbox them all so we don't get them confused, will have the appropriate channels. So you could have 4 interpreters working 4 different languages in the same courtroom. Isn't that cool?
Very
So that would, you know, my experience is that it's very difficult or not very common to have a trial, for instance, in which every defendant would have different languages, right? But what we have found out, for instance, and this is probably something that Hannah can convince the courts and that would help them tremendously, is that what we did where I used to work, and now you can turn them off because they also spend battery like crazy. So what we used to do, where I used to work, is that when we had domestic violence hearings, when the person came to the clerk's office to register, and they would say, I'm gonna need an interpreter for this language, right? So the clerks would take note. If it was for any language, they would say, your hearing is on Thursday. So all hearings for domestic violence injunctions in Orlando, Florida, are heard on Thursdays. So on Thursdays, it's like a United Nations. We have 4, sometimes 5 different languages and sign language going at the same time. So when the judge comes in and gives his or her speech, ladies and gentlemen, we're here for an injunction, blah, 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 everybody is present at the same time. That's right. This is the advantage of having equipment, especially if all my interpreters have now mastered the whisper mode. And then we had it was very cool to see. So now you have a lot more independence. Now, let's talk about it. Team interpreting is supposed to be done after we do simultaneous practice. I'm going to reverse them if you don't mind, because we've already been talking about team interpreting. So let's just move on to it, and it kind of connects with what we've been doing so far. So far, does everybody understand what the use of equipment will bring to the table for you? Are there any? Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, is this the standard equipment we're gonna get as microphone when we go to the court? Then how
Yes.
about the headset? We need to hear it. when we-
No, you're present in the courtroom. You can hear the courtroom. You're in the courtroom, right? Now, I know what you're saying, because in some conferences or something, you would have an actual headset that also would allow you to hear. That is possible, but what we would have to do is we would have you to have a receiver that would be then connected to the audio system, and you could hear too. We've done that too. So, and Hannah and I were talking about the possibility of having equipment outside the courtroom, and that's one of the possibilities, that the interpreter would have a receiver and a transmitter, and then they could hear what's going on in the courtroom also. But theoretically, if you're in the courtroom, you're going to be able to hear what's going on. And what happens, let me ask you all this question. What happens if you're in a courtroom and you cannot hear what the attorney is saying? What? You say, "Excuse me, Your Honor, the interpreter is unable to hear." Just like you would if you say, "Excuse me, Your Honor, the interpreter is unable to keep that pace. The interpreter is unable to interpret for two people that are speaking at the same time." Any other thing that is interrupting the process of interpretation, you would still have to inform the court. That's why you only need a microphone. Does that make sense? Any other questions on the use of the equipment? Yes?
The attorney, do they have one too?
No. No, because the interpreter, the attorney speaks English, so why would he or she need to hear your interpretation?
Don't they have to hear us speaking back to them?
But you would speak in a loud voice, right? Let's say, for instance, and that's a good question. I'm interpreting, may I have the equipment back? You don't need to turn on your equipment, you can just imagine, right? I'm the interpreter, and that lady over there, or Genevieve over there, needs the interpretation. I'm here in the court proceeding. So the judge is saying, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're here today, blah, blah, blah," and I would be saying, I would be interpreting, and she would be hearing. If she says something, "Oiga, no entiendo," then I would just use a loud voice and say, "Excuse me, I don't understand," or "Listen, I can't understand," or "I don't understand." It's as simple as that. So there has to be some kind of level of training, and that's why I was telling you that you tell the person in a soft voice, if you stop hearing me, let me know. If you have a question, raise your hand. You agree to those terms, so you don't have to be sitting right next to them. So the attorney of, not only the attorney, the whole courtroom would have to hear, well, it depends if the question is for the attorney or the judge, would have to hear what the person has to say. Does that make sense now? So obviously we don't want the judge and the attorney and everybody with headsets. That's not the intention of this equipment. Yes, sir?
It's not a question, just a comment. The
Yes.
risk in this process, as I see it failed, since the interpreter starts to whisper,
Yes.
depending on the LEP,
Mm-hmm.
the risk that I see in there is that if the LEP has something to say, the tendency will be to whisper back to the interpreter, in which case the interpreter will be interpreting something that the audience didn't listen to. So now, how do we overcome such?
Good question. If I understand correctly, if I'm interpreting, is what the person is going to say for the benefit of the whole courtroom? That's why we have to have agreements ahead of time. If you have something to say to the courtroom, raise your hand. If you have something to say to the attorney, raise your hand.
Even if it's something to tell to the interpreter. Let's say you're whispering to your microphone, saying, you're telling the LP something. Then the LP would like to tell you, for example, I didn't understand what you just said.
You tell them to raise their hand, and then you clarify with them.
My point is he or she will tend to whisper back to you.
Not if you're not even there.
So now, my question is, how, as an interpreter, are you going to interpret that question to?
Again, first of all, can I ask you all to have only one class? Because this happens a lot. People start having these private conversations, and two things happen. Maybe what you're conversing privately would be better for the benefit of everybody else. And second, then you're missing the answer or the question from the rest of the group. So I get your point, and it's very interesting how when we do these classes, we always come to worst case scenarios. That has never been a problem for me, and I've been interpreting for 25 years, and about 15 of them were equipment. But all you have to do is to develop a system, any system. You say, before you start, sir, if you have any question for me, the attorney, or you have something to say, raise your hand. That's the solution. And then you tell the attorney and the judge, Your Honor, I instructed, or may I instruct the person that if they have a question to raise their hand. Solve the problem, people. I've never had a problem with that. Yes, sir.
If you are finished with him, I have
Yes.
another question. Like, I'm whispering to the defendant, for
Right.
example, and I'm in a whispering mood. And
Yeah.
but everything's on record, so that record will be on a whispering mood, right? Everything.
Well, not everything is on the record. That's a whole nother chat.
Yeah.
So far, when interpreters were interpreting the old-fashioned way, like this, that was not on the record, was it? That has never been on the record. What the interpreter says in non-English has never been on the record. Now, there might be a time when people demand that what the interpreter says gets on the record somehow. When that time comes, guess what? You connect one of the receivers to a recording device, and then you record what the interpreter has to say. It's not that difficult. But that has never been an issue before. And I'll tell you why. What is the official language of the courts?
English.
So how's the record kept?
English.
And that's it. So what the interpreter is saying in another language has never been part of the record. Now, it's a good question because there is some push by the ABA and some attorneys say, hey, you know what? I would like to hear what the interpreter is saying in Japanese, right? When that comes an issue and a practice, it's very simple to solve. And, you know, I know that the courts don't even want to start talking about that, so let's not worry about it yet. Trust me, it's Pandora's box. It is. Yes?
But what, I think this is what some of the gentlemen are referring to, with the, a witness, LEP witness, for example, says in the non-English language,
Right.
some courts do want everyone in the room to be able to hear that.
So they are,
And they do want that picked up by their audio recording, right?
right, so the judge would say, the first time you say, they would say, please instruct the witness to speak in a loud voice when she's answering, even if it's in Spanish. You interpret that for the witness, and the witness now has been instructed by the judge to restore it. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
That is particularly necessary if you are not standing beside the person. The person
Absolutely.
needs to speak with a loud voice so that you can hear it.
Absolutely. And yesterday there was some mention of it with the ASL interpreters, and they mentioned the table interpreter. Did you hear that? The table interpreter. Okay. So, yes.
Okay, this question is because I'm a little technically impaired. So I'm not too good with this kind of stuff. But what you are saying, if I understood clear, is the person that's interpreting, the only thing they're going to be using is the microphone, and
Yes.
then the person that you are interpreting for is going to have the receiver.
Correct.
And that's the only.
That's the only thing.
Okay, so we're going to rely on our own hearing to
Yes.
be able to hear whatever
Just like
else
you-
is going around.
Correct.
Okay.
Just like you would if you didn't have equipment. Right?
Yeah.
So for the interpreter, really nothing changes, except you're no longer tied to the non-English speaker. You're no longer having to sit next to them, crook your neck, and try to not interrupt the court proceedings. The equipment is going to liberate you from that function. If it's convenient, if it's appropriate, if you think that it's okay and there's no witness testimony, and you're interpreting in the simultaneous mode, maybe you can sit here or maybe there, but you no longer have to be like this, right? That is it liberates you from that responsibility. Yes.
Since the question of being able to hear comes up, and it is a big question for
Sure.
me often in courts, I just want to mention that some of us at this table, actually, we were interpreting recently in a trial, and we were provided these devices that the court already had for the hearing impaired. And it had a, little.
You want to share? Okay. Well, how about we let Genevieve finish and then you share with us. Go ahead.
We were able to use devices that the court already had for the hearing impaired with a earpiece and a little receiver, and it worked off the recording that the clerk or the clerk is collecting of the audio of what everyone is putting into the mics around the room, and it was fantastic. It was the first time I had ever worked with any amplification of the voices in the courtroom, and it was just a tremendous luxury and aid. And I don't know if those tend to be available all around the courts in Maine, but it's something you might ask for. This was in August.
It's called an assisted listening device. They are in every courthouse. They're in every courtroom, and the clerk has those. And their primary purpose is for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, late deaf and often. And so, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, we provide those. But there are usually even more than one in every courtroom. Often there's two. And I've talked to the clerks about it because it was actually a very innovative way to use that equipment. And Genevieve, you were saying it just kind of heightened the entire experience for you in your ability to be able to interpret. So as long as there are no other individuals in the courtroom that need the equipment, you can feel free to actually ask for it. If you are having trouble hearing inside the courtroom, you can ask for that equipment. Now it's going to look like another receiver and another headset for you, so you're going to be walking around with, hopefully you've got pockets. But it is available, and I can see how, because it actually amplifies everything inside the courtroom. Judge, attorneys, the attorneys have microphones at the table sometimes, judges, witness, it depends on the courthouse. But all of that is picked up for our recording devices, and every proceeding that has an interpreter is recorded. So every proceeding that has an interpreter is recorded, which means that if you use that equipment, the assisted listening devices, you will be picking up everything that's happening inside that courtroom. So it's kind of an ingenious way to, and it might end up being an excellent tool for interpreters, because you can be way over here, and here's the judge, here's the attorneys, here's the witnesses. The purpose is amplification of everything inside that courtroom. And so Augustine's going, wow, we may be able to use this for other purposes, and it's true, and it's equipment that we already have. So what you'll see is there's a sign with an earpiece. Hang on one second, Carlos. It's just an ear with a little hash mark through it. But if you talk to any clerk or any marshal inside the courtroom and say, I'd like an assisted listening device, they'll know what you mean, and they know exactly where it is, and they'll give it to you.
And it's not impossible, and then I'll answer your question. It's not impossible. This one is not exactly what I meant. But you see how this headset looks like? It has a headset with listening devices and a microphone. And many of them have not one plug like this one, but two. One for the microphone and one for the headset. You've seen those for computers all the time. Well, if they give you a listening device, you could connect the listening part to that one, the microphone to this transmitter, and now you're fully connected, fully integrated, almost like if you were a cyborg to the courtroom. So you could hear perfectly and you could interpret very efficiently. Yes, sir?
I never used the assisted listening device in this context, but this conversation raised an interesting point. And that's the fact that what the assisted listening device picks up is what anybody is speaking on the record.
Yeah,
it won't pick up anything that is off the record, and that is a big plus, because there are side conversations, there are whispers here and there that are not part of the record. Perhaps it adds a little bit to the dynamic, but it is a distractor for the interpreter to try to pick up, well, wait a minute, is this on the record or off the record?
Right. So yeah, and for some interpreters like myself, wearing headsets that only pick up what you're supposed to interpret would make the experience a lot better. So there you have it. It's the use of technology that we have to increase hearing. We interpret, and it's all in one solution. Yes, sir?
Another point about the transmitter-receiver pair is if the foreign language speaker is not speaking to you, but to the court, and all you do is interpret because you rely on your own hearing to hear what the interpreter or what the defendant or what the individual is saying, that means the entire court picks up the register of what the person is saying. So we're no longer burdened by expressing the anger that the person is conveying to us instead of to the court, because the register is there. We don't need to convey the register anymore if the register is already apparent.
Well, let me just make some comments about that, because that's not exactly true. Let's talk first about register. Register is the level of sophistication of the language. We're talking more about the emotional component of the voice. Like now, the reason you still have to do that, if the person is indignant in one language and you have to sound indignant in the other language, is because I don't speak, let's say, Chinese. So for me, a person might sound like they're angry and they're not. I'll tell you, I'm Mexican, and people who don't know Mexican people, they think we're always yelling at each other. We're not. All right? So that still needs to be conveyed, the emotion. The register, you still have to keep it because they don't have, but it does help the dynamics a lot better, and it does produce, having the equipment is going to liberate you from many ties that you had before. I wanted to bring this up. So are we clear now as to how the equipment is used? As you can see, it's very simple to use. It's one component, transmit, receiver. If you need to hear better, go get the other component. That's for you, not the non-English speaker. We're clear on that, right? The one that if you want to hear better and you ask for the assisted listening device, that's for you to use so you can hear better, maybe interrupt the court a lot less, right?
And I will tell the marshals and I will tell the clerks that those assisted listening devices should be available to you as long as no one else in the courtroom needs them. If they don't read my email or don't get the message, say, well, Hannah told me I could have this, okay? And then they'll call me if there's any questions. But, you know, if there's ever any issue or if there's ever any question about it, the clerk should call me or you should call me, but just say, Hannah said I could do this. And that way we can open up the conversation about how that's being used.
Just another quick comment on this, is just, it's another reason to show up at the court early.
Yeah.
If you want
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Because you'll want to test it out, the
Yeah.
system has to be transmitting right, your batteries have to work.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do that after the court's in session, so.
That's a really good point, Genevieve.
Good point. Go ahead.
Okay, is it mandatory to use this equipment? Because say the LEP person looks at it and says, no, I'm not gonna do that.
It's not mandatory. I mean, it's not mandatory. I think it'll be useful, and they don't know otherwise. Most of the people that are coming into the courthouse, if you hand them this equipment and this is the way that we standardly